So why don't we go ahead and get started? Again, welcome everybody to our April edition of Legal Lowdown. This month, we're going to talk about getting hitched. These are things to discuss before going into business with someone, all kinds of issues relating to that. My name is Mike Fiffik. I'm your host. I'm the managing partner here at Fiffik Law Group. We have offices in Pittsburgh and suburban Philadelphia, and we represent thousands of small business owners all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that are in just about uh, any type of a business that you can possibly imagine. And I have a few of them listed there in my bio, but we've kind of represented somebody in just about all different types of businesses, whether they're the actual owner themselves or they're investors in the business. Maybe they're like the person that I talked to this morning, the surviving spouse of a business owner. So we do a lot of work with small business owners, helping them with the wide variety of things that come into their lives. Sometimes it's a litigation type claim or a problem, but a lot of times most of the time, we spend our time consulting with business owners, helping them understand what's going on, make smarter, more informed decisions to move their business forward and hopefully avoid problems rather than deal with them after the fact. Um, Today, this is going to be our agenda. Do you need a business partner at all? That's, I think, a threshold question that you really have to answer before you even get into what are the things that you want to talk about a potential business partner about. We'll cover a little bit of the pros and cons of having a business partner, and then we'll dive right into the meat of the substance and talk about questions that you should be discussing with a potential business partner. And I'll just make mention right now that one of the attendees is Amanda Malamud, my colleague here at Fiffik Law Group. She works with a lot of our small business clients as well. And to the extent, Amanda, that you have any commentary or something to add to any of these conversations, by all means, feel free to jump right in. And for all of you, if you have questions, comments along the way, please drop them into the chat, and we'll definitely be answering those either along the way or at the end of the session during Q&A. So really value your input. So let's dive right in. Where do business owners come from or business partners come from? Where do we typically see them come from? And they come from a lot of different sources, right? Very frequently, they're a family member. Maybe it's a parent or a child or a sibling of some kind. We do see those. Um, Maybe it's a coworker that you're working with, or a client or a customer of some kind that you're dealing with, where you have a similar business idea or a background or a concept that you would want to pursue with them. Could be a colleague in the same line of work or in the same industry. We all have, if you're out there networking, you're meeting people that are working sort of in your industry or adjacent to your industry that you might connect with and maybe have ongoing conversations about a business idea, and you guys and gals decide that you want to jump in. Maybe it's just a friend. It could be a childhood friend, a longtime friend, something that you've been talking about over coffee or drinks or whatever it is for a long time. And then you finally get the gumption to jump in and run with your idea. And then it could be a recruited person, of some kind. Um, you know, all of these types of sources of business partners have come with their pros and their cons, right? All of their pros and cons. I would say about a family relationship or a family as a business partner, especially between a parent and a child, that can be a bit of an imbalanced relationship right from the get-go. Because usually a parent and a child, the parent's the boss, the child isn't necessarily. Sometimes they become co-equals in the business, but there's that natural tendency that the child might be expected to defer to the parent, along the way in that business. Friends, just a little comment about that. It's perfectly fine and totally normal for friends to want to go into business with one another. I'll just say that whenever you start out, probably for the first 6 months in a business with somebody that's been your friend, there's probably a honeymoon phase that you go through, but then things are probably going to change with the business after that first 6 months or so. And Also, your relationship is going to change as friends. You had it one way, now you've added this business that you both are contributing to. There's going to be some struggles along the way that's going to put pressure on your friendship. So, I would say that if you're taking on a friend as a business partner or going into business with a friend, you really should expect that the nature of your relationship is going to change, and not always for the better, but that's just something that you need to be prepared for along the way. Recruited person, that might sound kind of an odd sort of a thing to be thinking about, but you know, this could be the friend of a friend that you've met. This could be someone that you've met in some type of an entrepreneurial group or network of folks that are interested in forming a business. So you all kind of have a similar mindset, at least from that standpoint. That's a kind of a good breeding ground to find somebody that wants to take some risks and start their business. So it might be that you join one of those groups or more than one of those groups, and network, decide to network in them so that you can meet like-minded people who, you might be able to meet in order to go into business together if you feel like your path involves having a business partner. So I think the threshold question here is, do you even need a business partner, right? I'm not sure that some folks really think about, they might be talking with a friend about a business idea. Maybe they've even talked about going into business together, but you know, you really should be asking this question right up front. Do you even need, a business partner? Well, here are some reasons why, uh, if they're present, that this says, maybe you need a business partner. Number one, you have no money and you really can't afford to hire anybody to do the things that are going to need to be done in order to get things done. So you might need a business partner just for their sweat equity, so to speak, right? Though they're going to do some things in order to move the business forward that you would otherwise not be able to do by yourself. And if you have a lack of funding, right, money to get your business off the ground, and every business needs money in order to get off the ground, you might be looking for somebody to be a business partner, and they're the money person, right? They're the one who comes in and brings the cash into the transaction, and that's their contribution to the business to get you some starting capital to get things moving along. That's a very good reason or common reason why you might need a business partner. Perhaps you are lacking some skills that are key ingredients to the potential success of your venture, and you have somebody else here who has the very skills that you're absolutely going to need. Now, I would really be careful about a skills-based need, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, later. It's not always any kind of skill, but maybe some special skills. It could be that you have a lack of experience, but you want to get into a particular business. A classic example is somebody who has always wanted to own a restaurant, but they've never owned or worked in a restaurant. That is a significant lack of experience that can really be a problem for somebody that wants to have a restaurant or go into a restaurant or do that type of a thing. You're really going to want to have somebody involved that has some restaurant experience, and I think you'll find that it would be extremely difficult for you to get any kind of funding or loans for your venture whenever you have no experience whatsoever. Nobody's going to want to give you money to do that because those have a high chance of failure anyway. So that you know, if you have a lack of experience, particular experience in a business, you're going to want to maybe get a business partner. And then a visionary, right? There's a difference between a visionary and an integrator. So, and I think it kind of takes both and to really have a successful business. So some folks are sort of big picture thinkers, they're broad thinkers, strategic thinkers. They really can sort of cast the vision, cast the mission. They know which direction that they want to go. They have a great idea that they've identified a problem that needs solved, and it could be monetized in some way, but they may not be able to do the legwork in order to get it from point A to point Z, right? you know, you need both of those. So sometimes if you're just a visionary, right, you're going to need an integrator, right? A person that gets the job done, so to speak. That's a good mix for a business partners, right? Where you've got both of the one person has one person has the other. Now, some entrepreneurs have both, right? And that can live within one person. And I see that all the time. But a lot of businesses have just visionaries and then they have integrators or boots on the ground operations people to get things done. So that can also be a situation where you probably want to be looking for a business partner if you're really a visionary. So let's talk a little bit about of pros about having a business partner. We should really be thinking about the pros and the cons, but there are definitely some pros of having a business partner. Number one, you have a greater chance to have some working capital right up front, right? Your business is going to need a budget. It's going to have the access to some type of capital to get it off the ground. You may not have enough, but maybe if you bring a partner on, that person contributes enough to get you off the ground and get you running. So, bringing a business partner in often means that you're getting some capital, and that's a pro, right? Because if no money, no mission, as they say. You also get somebody to share the load, right? And sharing the load can mean a lot of different things. Sharing the load can literally be the workload, right? You can't be in two places at one time, or there are lots of things to do, and you can't do them all, so to speak. But it can also be sharing the load from a creativity standpoint, from an idea generation standpoint, from a generation of leads or networking. You can share the load with somebody else. And sometimes that makes things a little bit easier, or maybe it just advances your business on its path of development a whole lot faster than it could be if you were the only one doing it, especially if you're trying to start a business while you've got something else going on, like a full-time job or a part-time job. That's really going to take you a long time to get things off the ground. But having another person involved might get it going a little bit faster. You also share the risk because if you know anything about business, business is always going to come with some type of a risk. If you're borrowing money from a lender, there's going to be a risk because you'll be personally liable for it. If you're signing a lease for a warehouse or an office space of some kind, you're going to be personally guaranteeing that, right? You're going to be putting money, your own personal money, probably into the venture, and you're putting your own money at risk. Maybe if you're even taking some money out of your retirement account in order to invest in the business. So those are all risks. And by bringing a business partner in or more than one, you're laying the risk off on some others so that if it fails, you're not eating the entire cost of that. Um, a business partner can bring, we touched base on this before, some expertise or some skills, that you don't have. Um, you really want them to bring some type of a skill that is a particular skill, right? Not just some type of a skill that is a skill that you can get everywhere. You just don't have it. Okay. I'll call those like short-term skills, things that you may not be able to afford right now, but you need them in order to get your business off the ground. But if you start making any kind of money at all, you can buy that skill out there. I don't think those are the kind of skills that you really should be looking for in a business partner. Rather, you should be looking for some unique skills, something that they bring to the table that is extra special about your business. And it may not necessarily be just skills, but it could also be strategic connections that they have, right? Those are very intangible, but some people have them, some people don't. And those strategic connections can be really important in either getting your business off the ground or scaling it, right? Maybe you want to sell some type of medical equipment, and they've got a strategic connections with a variety of healthcare facilities and who know all of the purchasing people there. Those would be some great connections that would be important in a business partner to bring in that could really help you launch and scale your business quickly. That's just, an example of that. Um, and a business partner will, again, help you scale your business faster because Instead of just one person doing all the work, you've got two or more people doing the work to get things done. But there are also some cons to adding a business partner that you really need to be aware of. Number one, most important maybe, is you lose control, right? You're no longer the decision maker. You lose control of the business, or lose complete control of the business in some instances, especially if you bring a partner in and you're 50-50. That can be a very problematic situation, but you lose control. You also are splitting the profits, right? If the business does become successful, you're going to be splitting the money with somebody. So there's going to be a less of a return on the hard work and investment that you're making into the business. And it might take you longer to get that money back because you're dividing it up. There's always the potential for conflict whenever you add a business partner, and you should expect that you're going to have conflict along the way. And, disagreements are one thing. We can usually get past disagreements, but conflict is just different. Those are real fundamental differences of opinion, fundamental differences of outlook, view that really end up being stumbling blocks for not only your relationship and ability to be able to work together, but maybe it's just a fundamental difference of opinion as to what direction the business should go. So conflicts are something that are going to most likely happen if you take on a business partner. When you take on a business partner, we will see that one of the things that you need to be thinking about, and this isn't defeatist mentality, but when you have a business, exit is usually something that's going to happen at some point along the way, right? Exit might mean that um, you take on, you sell the business and you make money. High five, you've made some money. That might be the goal that you want to do, is flip the business and move on, so to speak. Exit, can also mean that your business partner leaves the business for some reason. And, that can be a problem for your business, especially if they have key skills or relationships that they bring to the table and they take those with them whenever they leave. That can be a big problem. And then it's a problem figuring out the economics of their exit too. So it just makes it more complicated to for an exit strategy whenever you have a business partner. So here are some reasons, wrong reasons in my view, for taking on a business partner. And, these are motivations that I think are very common for folks who are thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, entering into a business. Maybe they're already in a business and they're stalled out and they can't really get it anywhere. But these are some things that might be motivators for taking on a business partner. Could be their own personal insecurities, right? Maybe you don't feel like you're good at networking or talking to people, right? That's a personal insecurity that you have. You can get over that, right? That's an insecurity that doesn't have to hold you back. That's something that you can overcome and conquer along the way. Maybe you just feel inadequate about your ability to handle or do certain types of things. Your personal insecurities really aren't a great reason for taking on a business partner in my view. If you're just afraid to go it alone, I think if that's how you feel and that you need somebody else to hold your hand, so to speak, as an entrepreneur, you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur at all. If you're afraid to go it alone, because being an entrepreneur necessarily means that you're willing to take risks, or that you're capable of taking risks. But if you're afraid to go it alone, that in and of itself, I don't think is a very good reason to take on a business partner. Both of these things invite the potential for a dependency relationship. If you're really dependent on that business partner in order to make the business go, to succeed, right? I don't think that that's a very healthy place to be in a business partner relationship, because dependency usually breeds resentment, contempt. It also creates a great amount of risk for the business if the person on whom you are dependent decides to leave or withdraw their support for the business. They also have leverage over you, so to speak. So That's not that those are situations where I think being involved in a with again taking on a business partner is usually a pretty bad idea. You don't want to do that. There are lots of options that you can look to that in lieu of taking on a business partner. If you feel like you're lacking something, you feel like you need one of those things, some of those issues are present that we talked about at the very beginning when you're assessing whether you need a business partner or not, you have some non-partner options that you could take a look at. First is find a mentor, of some kind along the way. There are lots of business mentoring options available to you out there. The SBA has an organization called SCORE, which is a business mentoring program. It's free, and they're going to match you up with a volunteer who has some experience and is aligned with the type of business that you're opening. So they're not, if you're trying to open a restaurant, they're not going to match you up with somebody whose experience is all manufacturing plastics. They're going to match you up with somebody that is relatively aligned to what it is that you're doing. So you could look into one of these types of mentoring programs. Small business development centers, which are associated with lots of universities, also um, have opportunities for mentoring, education, business development programs that are available out there for small business owners. If you don't know a lot about business, but you just have an idea that you think solves a problem that could be monetized out there, I think these are great places for you to at least start to educate yourself on all of the things that you might need to understand a little bit better about what it is to be a business owner. What are the types of things that you should be thinking about along the way? So find a mentor. There are mentoring programs out there if you feel like you need that. If there are some services or skills that you need in the short term, you could also try to find a freelancer, right? There are lots of freelance websites like Fiverr, Upwork, things of that nature that are out there who can provide some of these services to you at a lower cost that you might need in the relative short term. Maybe you need somebody who has graphic design or to build a website for you or to do those types of things. You can always try to get bids or put a request out for proposals on some of these freelancer sites in order to get some of this stuff done that you have absolutely no idea how to do, but you know that you need to get done for your business. So, want to explore those options because it's a whole lot less expensive than giving, half of your equity away to somebody who just happens to know how to do graphic design or build a website or do a little bit of marketing for you. Um, you know, a freelancer is just another way of saying a subcontractor of some kind, but a subcontractor might be somebody that's more regular, less project oriented that you could bring on, or even an employee of some kind to hire an employee to help you with some things. If you have some capital and you're able to hire somebody, you might want to think about doing that. And then there are also some business consulting or support groups, maybe even networking groups that are around that you could join. Sometimes they're free, sometimes you pay for a membership of some kind, and they put you into like a consulting cohort of some kind of other business owners, probably in the same stage of their development, where you can share problems and get feedback from others on how to solve them. You might network and find the ability to trade some services, along the way. A local one here in the Pittsburgh area is called PowerLink. PowerLink, that's all one word. And for a relatively low cost, you get plugged into an organization and their business mentors and coaches that can help you along the way in developing and growing your business. And they can bring a lot of skills, experience, acumen that, you might feel like you need, that you might be tempted to fill that void with a business partner of some kind, but you might be able to find it there. And it could be either free or a lot less expensive for you than bringing a partner on and all of the cons that come along with that. So if you've decided that you think it's a good idea to bring a business partner into your business, either at the outset where you're going to sort of jump in to the deep end together and start the business, or if you already have a business and you're bringing somebody on, I think the all of these things are applicable to those situations. And there's some questions that I would suggest to you are wise to get the answer, right? And I think most of these are going to apply in every situation. Number one, I think you have to assess your potential partner's motivation and whether the two of you are a fit, right? Here are some questions that you might want to ask. Number one, why do you want to start a company? I mean, it's a very basic question, right? If somebody doesn't have a good answer to that, I'm not really sure that they're ready to be a business owner. Certainly, you want to ask, what does success look like to you, right? What does success look like to you? Because it could be entirely different. Maybe you look at it from the framework of an income. Your idea of success might be, I, would define success as $10,000 of income a month from this business. Your business partner may say, if I'm getting three or $4,000, I'm kind of happy with that. And maybe they reach that and they plateau in their desire to do a whole lot more work with the business or take it to the next level. So, that can be a real problem if each of you are defining success entirely differently. So I think that is fruitful ground to have a conversation. Um, you should certainly ask your potential partner, when have you taken a chance in your life when others were unwilling to do it? Because that's what business people do. They're risk takers. Entrepreneurs are risk takers. And you should ask this question. And if somebody says, "I've never taken a chance," when I always go with the flow, I'm a follow the crowd kind of a person, they might not really have the characteristics that you would be looking for necessarily as a business partner. Maybe they can be somebody that can contribute effort to your business. Maybe if you tell them what to do and they do it, they carry out tasks, they can provide something valuable to your business. But I think that is kind of missing. That's a characteristic that you would need in a business partner, is to really be willing to take risks. If they aren't, then they're really just functionaries. They're just providing a service, and I'm not sure really bringing anything of any greater value to the table that means that you should give them an ownership interest in your business. Um, what are companies and products that they love and why, right? It could be a good conversation to figure out how you're aligned. Um, what are their strengths? If I were talking to a business partner, I'd say, tell me what your strengths are. What's your superpower? If you know what I mean. What's the extra thing that you do really, really well, that you're really good at along the way? You're going to want to know that, because they're going to identify some opportunities where you can that that can where their superpower can be applied. You'll definitely want to talk to them about that kind of a thing. And what are the weaknesses as well? You really want to know that. Most people don't have good answers to that, right? Like, I work too hard, or I'm too nice to people. Give me a break. Give me a real answer, to those types of things, not the fake ones that you use in a job interview of some kind. You really want to know what their weaknesses are, right? Maybe they say, I'm just not good at networking. I'm shy. I don't want to talk to other people, kind of a thing. I've never had to deal with employees in the past. I don't know anything about numbers. I'm not good with finances. Those are the types of weaknesses that I would really want to know, about somebody along the way. Um, Ask them if they've been involved in any conflict, personal conflict, and how they dealt with it. Because you're going to have conflict. You want to talk about these things in advance. It'll make it easier to get through the conflict if you've at least have some baseline conversation about how each of you views conflict, and you want to get how you want to try to get past it. Maybe later on, if you have conflict, you could say, do you recall the conversation that we had before we went into business together about how we thought it would be best to deal with conflict? And let's get back to that and let's approach it from that standpoint. I guarantee it'll be a much more positive approach than whatever approach it is that you're thinking about having in the heat of the moment when the emotions are high and conflict is going on. So good thing to talk about in advance. And then how are you coping with stress? If you have somebody that gets easily stressed out, they shut down whenever things happen. And some folks, that's just their coping mechanism. They want to escape. That's not going to be somebody that's going to be a great business partner for you along the way. They need to be able to double down. All right, question number two, or topic number two, for discussion between business partners is what do you view your respective roles, in the business? I think it's a great exercise to for each of you to rate yourselves on a scale of 1 to 10 in all of these categories for two different reasons, right? So you're going to rate yourself 1 to 10. What's my competency in each one of these? Am I great at sales or do I suck at sales, right? Am I good at fundraising or, you know, am I deathly afraid to ask anybody for money? Um, uh, you know, do I have the energy and am I a supporter? Can I recruit people to our cause, or is that just not something that I want to do? So 1 to 10, you want to rate yourselves, and then you also want to rate yourselves in what your passion is for these particular things. Like you might be good at fundraising, but you hate doing it, right? You might be good at finances, but it's the last thing that you want to work on if you're going to be an entrepreneur. How are these going to match up, right? Just compare your grades for with one another's to see where the alignment is, right? If you're both great at sales and you're both lousy at finances, um, you know, is that really a great partnership along the way? Or maybe it just says we we're going to need to find somebody to do the bookkeeping, the financings for us because we have no idea what we're doing, in that regard. So I think this is a great exercise for business partners to get involved in. Next, what do you want your role to be during the development phase of the company? We've just formed it. We have this idea and now we need to get started carrying it forward. So we're going to do some things in order to get things moving a little bit forward on the business. So what's your role in the development? What are you going to take and what am I going to take, so to speak? And what are we going to both work on? And then how do you see your role changing, if at all, whenever you've gotten the business up and running and now you're starting to scale, right? You've had your first sale or first couple of sales, you found your first customer, you got your first contract, whatever it is, or first couple of contracts, it's starting off and now you want to scale it up. How does your role change, at that point along the way? So good conversations to have. Next is commitment. This is a great one to talk about as well, because I see a lot of misalignment when it comes to commitment between business partners, and you really should have these conversations up front. Very important question. Will this business that we're starting or the business that you're coming into be your primary activity? Or is it only a side gig for you and you've got something else going on? Am I going to have to fight for your attention to the business? Or are you going to be telling me, I'm sorry, I can't do that today because I'm doing something for this other business? Maybe that's totally okay, depending on what your expectations are of one another or what your this other person is bringing to the business. If they're the money person and they're not really promising to contribute effort and time, then that's okay. They could say, I'm not going to be involved in the business at all, other than as an investor. Okay, that's fine. If that's exactly what the role is, that's an okay commitment under those circumstances. But if there's somebody that you're expecting to get things done in the business, that would not be good. How much time do you have to devote to this business, each week? And they might say I'm going to be 100% devoted to it now, but how is that going to change in 6 months or a year? Take a look down the road, because I'm not starting this business for a 3-month window. This is a business that I'm looking at more for the long term. It's going to take me more than 3 months to get to success, right? And any business would. So you really want to be saying, take a look down the road 6 months from now, 1 year from now. Are you going to be able to keep the same commitment all of that time to the business? If not, then that's something that you guys have to talk about. What's your work-life balance look like? Everybody's a little bit different. You know, some folks are willing to start early and work late. Some folks are more like 9 to 5ers type of a thing. Some folks say, I've got these certain commitments that I can't get rid of, and they happen at the beginning of the day, the end of the day. Maybe it's family, whatever it is, that you're not willing to trade off, right? You've got different work-life balances that can end up being a friction point unless you have an understanding about that stuff up front. And then how will you support yourself financially while we're developing this business? That's a really important question, right? How long can you sustain that lifestyle and support yourself without a draw from the company? Because the company may not be generating revenue for some period of time, may not be profitable, meaning profitable enough to pay you something in return for the efforts. It might just be that it's consumed with all of its ramp up expenses. The revenue is consumed by buying product in order to sell it, to have inventory on hand in order to sell it along the way. It's not unusual at all for entrepreneurs to make no money in that business for some period of time, right? When you own a business, you get paid last. That's just all there is to it. If you're starting this business and you need to have income in 3 months from this business, that's something that it would be better for you to know up front versus later on, down the road, because that's going to end up being a problem. And then, how much do you need in order to basically just pay your bills and get by, or be comfortable, or what's the number where you feel like you're a success, how much you're making whenever you're a success. These all are questions, the answers to which reveal the level and nature of the commitment that your business partner might be willing to make to the business. So let's talk about money, right? Funding capital, super important. You know, Super important question that surprisingly, maybe it's surprising to you, it's not surprising to me. Lots of folks who are starting a new business, um, I always ask this question: where's your money coming from? Do you know how much money you need, right? A lot of folks don't have a business plan, right? Don't even know how to put a business plan together. Don't know what goes into a business plan. And I think a fundamental question that has to be asked before you start any type of a business is, how much money do I need to launch this business, right? How much money am I going to need after launch in order to scale the business? Once I start getting customers, getting orders, things of that nature, you have to know in advance how much money that you're going to need. You really have to have realistic estimates. And then where's that money going to come from, right? Are you bootstrapping your business, meaning you're putting your own money in? Do you think that you're going to get loans from banks or other financial institutions? They lend money into businesses. They lend money to buy a business. If it's a going concern, yeah, you can get a loan like an SBA loan of some kind to buy an existing business and get it out there. That happens all the time. Maybe you're intending to borrow money from friends and families, some angel investors along the way. I hear some businesses that folks that want to start a business by looking for grants. I don't think that's a very viable way to get your business funded by depending on some kind of grants. Meanwhile, there are not a whole lot of grants out there to start for-profit businesses anyway. And most people don't have any skills at grant writing to begin with, and it's a long process, right? I mean, if you want to start your business next week, there's no grant process that is going to be a 1 week process where you get money. Now, there might be some micro funds that are in the community. There are lots of community development corporations in everywhere, and they've got some small time grants or small grants that can be given to businesses, but it isn't going to be just your seed money 9 times out of 10. It might be for something very specific. But there are some grants available out there and you can pursue them, but you really shouldn't count on them as the only seed money for your business. That's just not realistic, not going to work 9 times out of 10. You know, you should ask your business partner, are you willing to invest money in the business? And if so, how much? What do you have? Especially if you're bootstrapping, that's going to be a super important question to ask. Um, And do they have anything else to contribute to the business? Because, you know, you can start a business, you need cash, but you may also need something else. And so your business partner might have equipment, right? Maybe you're starting a contracting business. Maybe you're starting an excavation business and your business partner has a dump truck, right? That's a pretty big thing to contribute to the effort of starting an excavation business. So they may not bring cash, they bring equipment that they can contribute to the business. Maybe they have intellectual property of some kind that they're bringing to the business as well. Maybe customer relationships, a contract of some kind, licenses and permits, right? Maybe they've got a liquor license that they've got in storage that they can contribute in order to the business to open up a cafe or a restaurant of some kind. So there are non-cash contributions that your business partner can bring to the table that can be very important. But these are all things that are important to discuss. Structure, a lot of people start with structure. I don't think that you get to the structure conversation unless you've gone through all of the other things that I've talked about, because any of those could say, this isn't a good mix. This isn't a good match. This isn't going to work out between the two of us if the business needs $50,000 and you don't have any money to contribute to the business. Where are we going, right? The structure doesn't matter at all if you're just not right for one another, so to speak. Oftentimes, that's the first thing that people tell me whenever they bring somebody to the table. We're going to go into this as 50-50 partners, but they have no earthly idea about one another or any of the other things that we've talked about. That's completely upside down thinking when it comes to this type of a topic. But if it's a good fit, if you think that this is something that you want to move forward on after answering a lot of those other questions, then yeah, you absolutely have to think about ownership structure, right? You know, what are the equity rights? Equity meaning ownership of the business, the ability to draw profits from the business at the end of the day as a result of your ownership interest. You also have voting or control rights. Those, can be, you can have equity rights, but no voting. Um, but you don't have to have voting and equity don't have to go together all the time. So you can have an ownership interest that has equity and voting. You can also have ownership interests that are just pure equity, but really no control over the business. There are lots of different ways of putting this thing together. What's your respective split? Is it 50-50, 80-20? Lots of different ways of doing this type of a thing. You'd probably want to ask your business partner in advance, how do you feel about bringing other business partners? Because you might need to do that somewhere along the way in order to grow your business or scale your business. And if you're going into business with somebody and you don't know, but it comes to pass later on down the road that, hey, what do you think we bring somebody else in? They say, I'm not willing to give up my 50%, any portion of my 50% ownership interest in the business. That's could be a killer right then and there. So, if you're anticipating growing the business, you really should be saying, are you open to bringing other equity owners into the business? We're going to have to dilute our ownership interest in the business. Certainly, if you ever take on investors or private equity along the way, if that's somewhere in your future, you're going to have to give up equity in your business in order to get funding, capital, and all the other things that private equity investors bring to the table. Um, Finally, this again sounds like a defeatist sort of a thing to be talking about right up front, but you really should have an eye on, breaking up at some point along the way, getting hitched and then breaking up. They're, two sides of the same coin. We've talked about resolving conflict. How do you deal with conflict? How are we going to resolve conflict, right? If we just don't see eye to eye on something, how do we move things forward? You can't go into business allowing for the potential that there's just going to be deadlock, especially if you're 50-50 owners. That is a really super important question to answer. It might just be, okay, we'll flip a coin and, it go, or we'll just each of us get our way half the time, so to speak. I don't know what it is, but you're going to have to figure it out. Maybe there's some type of a mediation for super conflicts that you would go into, knowing that you're going to have to pay in order to go through that mediation process. But there has to be a way of resolving some kind of disputes and getting past, deadlocks. What happens if the business isn't turning a profit? If your window of willingness to put effort into this business is a year or two, and you know that comes to pass, and you're not getting out of the business what you had hoped in the way of an economic return, and you went out, what does that mean? What does that mean for the one who wants to stay in? Uh, Really important question to be thinking about. What if that happens if the business isn't growing? Or there's circumstances, what circumstances, if they came to pass, we would both agree that, you didn't be entitled to fire me, so to speak. Um, could be disability. I can't, something happens in my life health wise that I can't contribute to the business anymore in the way that I said that I would be committed to doing things. That might be a buyout trigger, or you exit the business. Maybe, your life circumstances mean that you have to move to some remote location that prevents you from being involved in the business like you had intended. You've opened a cafe and the business, you were the cook, right? And, your spouse takes a new job in Chicago, you can't be the cook anymore in Harrisburg. So, that can happen too. What does that mean? What are those circumstances? Maybe you've stolen money from the business. Maybe you've been charged with a crime or something like that. These are things that you should be thinking about. And then, are you willing to sell the business, right? Because that's a potential breakup or exit. What would be the trigger? Um, how would we value the business? Do you want your investment back if you have to quit or if you become disabled? Um, you know, are you willing to take payments over time? How will we put a value on that? These are all things that you should really be talking about upfront, because if they do happen, really the idea is for the one who remains in the business to be able to continue sustaining and growing the business while also getting you something out of the business as a result of your investment. So just got a couple other things to cover here before we look at your questions. A little bit of extra credit. If you think that you've found somebody that could be a potential business partner before you jump in, maybe try working on a small project together. See how that goes, right? A little experiment to see how it all works together. Some type of a task. Each of you take some portion of it, come back together and work on it, sort of a thing. How does that work? Like a little lab, so to speak. Might be kind of a fun thing to do, but it might give you some insights on what it would be going forward to work with this person. Sometimes when I'm doing contract negotiations, I tell the client, you should really push back on a few things. Not that you necessarily want the things that you're pushing back on, but just to see how the other side reacts, because it gives you a window into how they're going to be to deal with on a going forward basis when real problems, come up. So if you're negotiating that commercial lease with a landlord, you want to push back on some points to see how willing they are to be open to your asks and wants and desires. Because if in negotiations you say, I'd like this, that, and the other, and they say, we're not willing to negotiate at all, what that should tell you is if you become the tenant, they're not going to be very open to doing anything for you. And you should take that into consideration whenever you're making that decision to sign on the dotted line on a lease. And the same kind of principle holds true whenever you're taking a business owner. But if you do decide that you want to move on, and there are going to be some things that you're going to want to get done after you've said handshake, yeah, let's do this kind of a thing. Reduce those key understandings to writing, right? At least put some bullet points down. Here are the key agreements that we've talked about that we agree to. And you can use that entire set of questions as a format for a letter of intent or some type of a key understandings note, whatever it is that you both sign with the understanding that this is going to be formalized later on down the road. But this is just our set of understandings that we have that says we're going to move forward to the next phase of putting our business together. So if you already have a business and you're taking on a business partner, a couple of things that you should be doing before you actually have that person join the business. Number one, you should take a look at your operating agreement or bylaws. They might need to be modified because you're bringing a business partner in. A lot of operating agreements or bylaws, especially if you formed your business online, they're kind of made for single member business owners, right? They don't have any provisions in them that talk about voting and exit and conflict resolution and things of that nature. Your operating agreement may need to be revised to have provisions that speak to all of those types of issues. And you want to put those in place before you bring somebody on board because they may not even negotiate those terms. And if they buy into the business or they accept an ownership interest, they are going to be bound by the terms of your operating agreement that's in place at the time that they come in. So you might as well get all of that stuff put together, maybe in a way that benefits you before you bring somebody on. Um, if the business has intellectual property associated with it, trademark, copyright, whatever it is, you may want to think about transferring ownership of the intellectual property to yourself and that you license it to the business, right? So that you still have control over that in the event you have a problem with your business partner along the way. You don't want to give them necessarily ownership of the trademark or the licensing rights or whatever it is. So you may want to convey those just to yourself and then you license them to the business so that they're always yours. They're never jeopardized in the event of a dispute. You may want, if the business has a couple of different business lines, maybe you want to restructure the business so that you put certain business lines under different business entities that you continue to own and control individually. I keep going back to restaurant examples. I apologize for that, but maybe you've got a business, maybe it's a cafe, right? And you've also got a food truck, and you don't necessarily want a business partner for the food truck, but only for the cafe. Well, maybe you form a separate business entity and the food truck is owned and run by that business entity. It's just you. And you take your business partner into just the cafe portion of it because that's what you need investment in order to grow that business kind of a thing. So you might want to do some type of restructuring, along the way there. You may want to retitle assets, especially ones that are personal to you. So if you've got a car or a truck titled to the business and you bring a new business partner in and now they own 50% of your business, now they own 50% of your personal vehicle. And in the event of a dispute, that can end up being a problem. So you may want to have those either owned by you or titled to you or put some type of an agreement in place that says in the event of a dispute, that's just not going to be considered a business asset that anybody else can get to. That's always going to be personal to you. Same thing with cell phones, laptops, any types of assets, like that. Could be even be, again, intellectual property. And then you may also want to um, structure contracts, have contracts in place with the business that entitle you to get paid for certain types of services that are being provided to the business while you also bring a business partner in. Now, this is pretty common in medical practices where you've got a medical practice that has contracts with a different business entity, often owned by one of the physicians, that are providing management services, billing services, purchasing services, things of that nature. Um, and you're taking cash out of the going concern that you want to make sure that you're getting, and then you bring a business partner in. You always are guaranteeing that you're getting some income out of that business, even though you aren't in 100% owner anymore. So there are ways to maybe do some, again, restructuring of the business entity with some contracts so that you're getting paid um, and you're not leaving all of the business revenue to your new business partner along the way. So that's the substance that I have for you today. Just a couple of notes here on resources that we have available to you. You can subscribe to get our weekly Legal Lowdown email newsletter. It's a one topic uh, blog post or note that comes out, typically one topic of things that are going on in the business world. You might want to get that. So you can log on to that there. You can even go and subscribe on our website. We have a YouTube channel that has lots of webinars on business related topics, including all of our Legal Lowdown recordings. If you'd like to view those or share those with your customers or potential customers, if you think that they might be valuable to them. We also have business health checks on our website. If you go to the business section, that are good questions and answers to help identify some things that you might want to know a little bit more about relating to your business. And maybe connect with us to talk to you and give you some advice and help on these types of things. So you might want to check those out. So let's take some questions. I'd be happy to answer along the way. Let me see here what we got. Um, Connie asks, what percentage of partnerships wind up breaking up or breaking down? Um, I don't know offhand. There are a lot of partnerships that last a long time along the way, but I'd say probably half of business partnerships or more end up with some type of an exit of one of the business partners. Now, it isn't because it's a bad thing. It might be totally okay with the business partners. Maybe they leave and it's all perfectly a happy situation and there aren't any kind of problems there. But I think that you should expect that there's going to be some type of a breakup. It doesn't have to be a bad breakup. You can still be friends after you broke up along the way. That does, happen, out there. Um, but that's what happens. So any other questions that I can answer for anybody along?